This is an RNZ podcast.
They say it takes a village to raise a child. I'm Kathryn Ryan, and here we draw on my conversations with experts on 9 to Noon to help you navigate family life. Well, now to the most incredible organ we all possess, the brain. How does it develop from newborn to adult? Why do male and female brains grow differently? And what are warning signs for parents if a child isn't developing, well, normally? It's a pleasure to welcome back brain researcher, parenting coach and founder of X Factor Education, Nathan Wallis. Nathan, good morning to you.
Good morning, Kathryn. Good to hear your voice. Are you well?
I am well, although I've just had my buttons pushed, so I'm going to
I did hear that. I was in full agreement with you.
Sometimes it's better out than in.
That's right.
Look, it's a big topic, but of course brain development starts even earlier than birth. It underpins so much of your work and so much of your research. Why don't we go back and look at some of the basics again? What is happening even before birth?
Right, before birth, the baby's already data gathering. You know, people tend to think that everything's set by your genes because our parents grew up in a generation that learned all about genes. So people think, if Albert Einstein or Aparana Nat is your birth father, then you're just pretty much set. But actually, the human brain is a really unique organ and it's designed to interact with the environment to see what sort of brain you're going to need for the rest of your life. So overall, the research will say that about 50% on average of your outcomes are determined by genes, but 50% are about this brain's ability to adapt to the environment. And even in the womb, it's already starting to gather information on what sort of environment is it going into. If mum's getting foot rubs and cups of teas brought to her and is, having a good old time, she's releasing endorphins into her brain, and so into her whole body, into her bloodstream. So those endorphins are positive hormones, and they basically flood the womb, and they tell the baby, "Whoa, it's pretty bliss out there. Mum's having a good old time. I don't need to get ready for war. I can sort of get ready for those higher intellect things." Whereas if we go to an opposite example, the mum's living in a domestic violence relationship, even when there isn't actually violence present, just her worrying about perhaps violence is going to happen releases the stress hormone cortisol. And so the cortisol is again being washed over the baby, and the cortisol is telling the baby, oh, it's a pretty hostile environment out there. I better start getting ready for survival mode rather than, compassion and love mode. I mean, it's not what happens in the pregnancy doesn't dictate the baby's brain because it's data gathering in lots of ways over its whole life, but especially in the first 1,000 days, which is from conception right up to 2.5. So even in the womb, the baby's already interacting with that environment.
And of course, we know the effect of nutrition. Now we're increasingly learning the effect of maternal nutrition on things like predisposition to obesity, and of course staying away from alcohol. Because of the fetal alcohol syndrome, which is an injury to the brain, really.
Yeah, it is.
Okay,
and no amount's a good amount, really. There still perpetuates these myths that because a lot of people might be able to drink some alcohol and there's no foreseeable impact on the child. But that still doesn't mean there's a safe amount. So I'd say stay away from it altogether. So
the secret of all that is look after mum, pamper mum, support mum as much as possible, even before birth, so that there's good vibes.
Yeah. Try and have stress-free pregnancy. It doesn't have to be stress-free. You don't want mums freaking out that, oh no, I had a fight, did that damage the baby? It's what happens most of the time.
Yeah, for sure.
The baby's quite resilient.
Now, even in those early days and hours, of course, there's just this explosion of cells, basically, isn't there?
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah.
It's just, you don't see it anywhere else in nature, the explosion that happens. So it's like, basically, the earlier it is, the more important it is. So that speaks lots to the pregnancy, but it means those first few days are incredible. We talk about the first 1,000 days up to 2.5, but midwives talk about the golden year, that first year. Because in the research, we can predict so many of your adult outcomes from the age of 1.
So what is happening to the brain during that first year? This is all about interactions in its new world. It's all about interactions, but it's actually shedding. Is it not basically shedding at the rate of not sorting out information and making connections and prioritising? There's an enormous sort of physiological event happening.
It is. It's got to make connections. I often think about the metaphor that you've because the baby's got their own consciousness. They're born with a temperament. They're born with a consciousness. But it's like you've arrived into a spaceship that you've got no idea how to fly the spaceship. And the spaceship is the human body. So you've got to learn how to use it. And it takes a couple of years. And in that first year, like you said, that making connections, that's what they're really trying to do. But really that first year in many ways is actually about their feeling of safety. So in lots of ways, in the first year of life, the parent's job really is to make that child feel secure. So I think don't overcomplicate it. I say to parents that your job in the first year of life is to treat the baby like they're the centre of the universe and you are their slave. That's pretty much, if you do that in that first year of life, that gives the baby all of that security and that responsiveness and that being in relationship. And that's really what sets a foundation for future success.
And that's where that eye contact and talking to baby and interacting and playing, just all of that stuff is just absolute gold.
It is, it's absolute gold. When people get that idea of sort of needing maybe to do flashcards of the alphabet and stuff, and it's just that's really not the case at all.
Maybe Einstein.
Yeah. I think because people essentially don't remember being before 7. And from the age of 7 onwards, you're in this brain number 4, the frontal cortex. So like in lots of ways, a 7-year-old is a little 25-year-old. But in the first 7 years of life, you're in those 3 lower brains, so it's quite a different experience, and they've got quite different needs.
Remind us what they are.
The bottom 2 brains, number 1, survival, keeps you, alive, keeps your heart beating, and it's a home of fight, flight, or freeze. And then number 2 is movement. So if that's all you've got, survival and movement, then you're a reptile. That's called the reptilian brain. To get brain number 3, you have to be a mammal, so you can just think of it as the mammal brain, but that's your feeling brain. That's where your emotions come from. And then brain number 4 is this wonderful sort of not just human, other mammals have it, but we've got the biggest one. This is the brain that does all of the things that you can do that the dog can't do. Reading and writing and controlling your emotions. And we kind of live in there as adults. So we have emotions, but we can regulate our emotions. We only act like spoiled children about 5% of the time. but children act like that 95% of the time if they're 2, because they can't regulate their emotions as well. They don't have that brain number 4 online yet.
All right. Now, the movement one was an important one I've always learned from you, which is that movement, rocking, and the movement opportunities for a young infant are very important. And remind us why.
Okay, we talk about rhythmic patterning with brain number 2. I think when you refer to the rocking, you don't essentially actually have to rock a baby, because if you were, that's just how we typically do it in our culture. But actually the baby would pick up a rhythmic pattern from the to and fro interaction between parent and child. It's just that that's much more abstract to tell parents, so it's easier just to indicate, rocking your arms, and you meet the needs of brain number 2. If brain number 1, say, to be calm, because the brain works from the bottom to the top, so if you want to get up to the wonderful brain number 4, you've got to meet the needs of brains 1, 2 and 3. Brain number 1 needs attachment. That's why I said about just indulging the baby and making them the centre of the universe. And then brain number 2, you could say, needs a rhythmic pattern. So we can put your parents might have, and my parents might have put a rhythmic pattern in us by rocking us repeatedly. That movement brain, because it's a foundation for the rest of the brain, and it's really coming online between 6 and 18 months. If you think about it, the baby's pretty much a blob in your arms at 6 months of age, and then 1 year later, that blob in your arms can now walk, crawl, run, climb, use fine finger movements. All of these amazing motor skills come online in that 1 year period. So that's when that movement brain is really coming to flourish. I would say the important thing to remember there is freedom of movement. Because that body's been evolving for hundreds of thousands of years. It just needs freedom of movement to do it. Most of it's driven by genes. But if we trap the baby, we've constantly got them in a jolly jumper, a walker, a safety sleeper, a high chair, a pram harness. If they're constantly trapped, that can inhibit that, I think of it like a rose flowering in the garden. You've got to let it bloom. If you tied the rose up, it would not bloom very well.
Let's talk about quite a big chunk of years, but I've always been very interested also in your views on them, which is, say, 3 or 4 through to about 7. This is where creativity and play should dominate, and what is happening in the brain that means that's the number 1 thing.
This is probably the thing that frustrates me the most, Kathryn, because it's so very, very clear in the literature. It's so very, very clear in the PISA scores, the international scores we use to measure educational outcomes for countries around literacy and numeracy, that the countries that score consistently at the top, Finland and other Scandinavian countries, they really meet the needs of this brain number 3. There's none of that formalised teaching until the age of 7. So between the ages of 2 and 7, they value free play, creativity. It's very clear in the research that resilience is built between 2 and 7. And it's very clear that the more free play there is, and the less adult-directed play there is, the more resilience the children will garnish. You said about creativity. Being successful as an adult is not just about knowing the right answer. It's about how to produce answers, create answers, invent answers. That ability for the human brain to be creative doesn't just come from genes. It essentially comes online between the ages of 2 and 7. And if you sit the kid down at a desk and say, let's get you ready for school, you're kind of wrecking that creativity.
I love the way you explain it also, even as a parent, when you are talking about, the stars in the sky or how the moon got there. Don't get out an encyclopedia and give all the answers.
Right,
Ask
yeah.
the child, like, this is what I love. You turn it around and we'll say to a child of that age, what do you
Yes.
think's going on there? How do you think that they got there?
That's right.
And
That's
that is more important than them knowing some obscure scientific fact they can Google when they're 25.
That's so true, because that's that heart of creativity, and that what the literature calls dispositions, the child's set of attitudes and beliefs that encourages them to come up with new ideas. You don't get that if you're in a very, what colour is this, what number is this. My grandson said to me recently, when I said something about a colour being orange, and he said to me, there's no such thing as orange, that's just something that adults made up. There's just red, and then there's red with gold on it. But there's no such thing as orange. I thought, well, that's a really unique perspective. Maybe orange is just red with gold on it. But I love kids coming up with that divergent way of thinking. That's, to me, tells me that my grandson's intelligent, not his reading age at 5.
Let's talk about the school years. We might not get much further, actually, because there's a couple of things we want to talk about. For a start, your view on the school starting age. I've got an emailer asking about this, and I think I know the answer. We just get into formal education too early, don't we?
We do. But that's changing, though. The New Zealand's currently reviewing the curriculum. I've been involved in that, and I'm pretty confident that when the new curriculum comes out, that emphasis on formalised learning before 7 will be gone.
So how might it look for 5-year-olds?
If you can possibly leave your 5-year-old at the early childhood centre, 95% of the time, that's probably a good idea.
Okay.
Yeah, that's on the short
And that's
answer.
that's probably going to become possible soon. Is that what you're saying?
That's possible now to leave your child there until 6.
Until 6.
Yeah,
Okay.
because they operate under Te Whāriki, the early childhood curriculum, which is a social emotional curriculum, so it fits very well with that stuff I just said about resilience, and so that curriculum should run really until they're 7, and I think the new curriculum will reflect that.
Excellent. Okay, so this is the Year 1-2 curriculum this parent is asking about, and you're saying that's in the process of changing.
That's right. So if you're right now starting, though, and that new curriculum isn't rolled out yet, and you might still have some schools trying to get your child ready to be 7 at 5 and trying to put pressure to do literacy and numeracy, and you don't want that, that's why I say 95% of the time you're probably better off staying at the childcare centre until they're 6, if that's possible.
Another issue raised in the question is neuroscience and its contribution to understanding the individual differences, e.g. between boys and girls.
Right, yeah.
What typically do we see? The old sort of truism was always that girls tend to be developmentally ahead of boys at that age.
Yep.
What do we know?
We do know that female brains seem to come online faster. They don't end up being more intelligent. There's no statistical difference between the IQ in male and females, but certainly female brains come online earlier. Now, there's evolutionary, theory about that. Is it because they were raising 10 kids and you need your whole brain for that? And you were having babies at, 15, not at 35. So there might be evolutionary reasons why a female's brain comes online really quickly, because she needs it for this complex task of raising children. Men say if they're out hunting and warring, the last thing you want is your whole brain online for doing that, in terms of you don't want empathy and compassion if you're a soldier. So it's probably, nature's probably got an advantage in leaving the male brain for as long as possible before it develops, so then they remain more effective warriors. That's pretty simplistic, but there is certainly differences between the growth rates of male and female brains, but it's hard to talk about because we don't really just have a male and a female brain. That whole binary concept's really gone out the window. It's a spectrum of gender. You don't have 100% female brain, and I don't have 100% male brain, which is not surprising really, because both of us have one male and one female parent. So that's
and we could have gone either way quite early in conception.
That's right. It's one chromosome. We're talking. Yeah,
exactly.
And so there are things that overlap. There will be traditionally, say competitiveness is seen as a male trait more. It could be that you are actually way more competitive than I am. Even though you're a female and I'm a male. It could be that I'm way down the nurturing end for a male. So
what it does say is expect differences between your kid and the kid next door. And those differences may follow a predictable pattern or a stereotyped pattern, or they may not. But there will be differences.
But there is clear patterns. Especially if you combine it with birth order. If you've got a firstborn girl, firstborns do things faster, girls do things faster. So a firstborn girl's probably at 2 and a bit saying, "Can I have a drink, please, mummy?" And then at 5 she can write her name, knows how to count to 100. And then your boy you have 2 years later, he's 2 and a bit, and he's not going, "Can I have a drink, please, mummy?" He's going, "Dink." dink, want dink, because a boy's brain grows slower. He's not the firstborn, so it's slower still, so you'll see a huge difference. So I do think in general, be wary of boys who are not the firstborn, of putting them under too much pressure to develop too quickly. They're not supposed to show interest in literacy and numeracy until 6.5, 7.5.
In fact, if you want a real horror show, what's the range between the firstborn daughter maturing and the son further down?
Well, she'll have a fully developed adult brain, probably, if it's a firstborn girl, probably at 18. And then her brother, that is usually 2 years later, he'll have a fully developed brain at 32. So that's 14 years after. So
chill
it
out.
is worth knowing that.
So be patient and persevere.
Don't compare them.
Exactly. Look, a couple of real quick fires, questions if you could.
Yep.
My daughter is locked down in Melbourne, having moved over with a 3-week-old baby just before lockdown. Baby
Yes.
now only sees her parents. What effect is this going to have?
It's going to have a wonderful effect. That baby's blissed. This is the best time for them to have lockdown. The baby doesn't need anybody else at 3 weeks of age. They need their parents available, and they're in lockdown. They can't go to work. It's difficult to go to the supermarket. So this is actually a win for the baby. They've got their undevoted, their parents' undevoted attention.
And one more, and it's a big topic that you might want to expand on later, although I think there's a short answer given the age that's referred to. The effect of marijuana and its ability to cross the blood-brain barrier in adolescents and young adults. Can you comment?
Yeah, because I have to know that for my job, but it's lots of complex science, but basically it's really bad for you before the age of 18. After the age of 18, there's no evidence that it does anything. So it very much is about the adolescent brain, not so much the young adult brain. So that means I don't care if my teenagers are experimenting with pot so much when they go to university, because it's not going to have a lifetime effect on their brain. But at high school, that is really dangerous.
We only got to midway through primary school with our. We'll pick up, but it's wonderful stuff always. It's good to go back and do the basics, Nathan.
Yeah, there's so much. It's just like a treasure trove of information. There's just more all the time.
It's wonderful. Thank you as always, Nathan Wallis, brain researcher, parenting coach, and founder of X Factor Education.